to the BarnBurner TV Network on Zingo TV Channel 250. Please remember to download both the BarnBurner and Zingo TV apps in the respective app stores in Android and iOS devices. While you download, please rate us and comment and leave a comment. We always like to hear how your application is going, if there is problems, so we can perfect, so you can see us perfectly. Both applications are totally free, so you don't have a reason why not to download them. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Chromecast sticks, Amazon Fire and Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Well, this is an amazing, it's going to be a great show. I have our standing queen of sport in Elizabeth Rosestad, and our newcomer into the BarnBurner family, and now a statue in the hockey world when it comes to BarnBurner, Ben Brown. Well, welcome, Elizabeth. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you so much for having me, first of all, and I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Ben, welcome to the show. It won't be your, this is your first, and it won't be your last, believe me.
This actually, I think, might be my second. I was on with Alan Milstein a few weeks ago.
That's right. You were with Alan.
Yeah, but this is my first time being the primary male guest on this show. So honored to be here.
Let's see. Yeah, I still think I am still there. I haven't changed yet, or I haven't gone to Church Street yet. But yeah, so guys, it's going to be an all-around show. I know that it has always been the baseball show tonight, but we have to change the parameters a little bit because we have a lot of time to talk. So let's start with baseball because that's what the show is all about. Recent news in the baseball world, from opening day lineups to coincidentally today I was reading an article on the top 10 rotations in baseball, and it shocked me completely because, well, the number 1 and 2, I can see it. Farther down that line, it wasn't too good for me. The first one being the Washington Nationals. They are considered to be the top rotation in baseball, with Schwarzer in the lead. But I mean, I don't know how can you call a top rotation in baseball when we haven't had baseball yet. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously difficult, Eduardo, to make predictions on this sort of stuff without there having been a season. But I think just on paper, Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg are two of the top pitchers in all of baseball, and they happen to be in one rotation, one right after the other. So, the Nationals could have, a couple of AAA pitchers, frankly, in the bottom couple of spots in their rotation, and it would still be pretty good considering they have two of the best. But, I think you're right overall that it's difficult to pinpoint this sort of stuff, especially in a season like this where, it's so unique and so different from what we're used to seeing. Obviously, this is going to be a 60-game season, so we might see, smaller rotations, like we might not see a 5-man rotation for some squads. They might decide to go with 3 or 4. But, with playing 60 games in 66 days, there's not a whole lot of time for off days. So, a lot of other teams are going to stick with the customary 5. But in terms of your question itself, I think that, those two guys in particular are two of the best at this in the game. And, so yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint, but just looking at names on paper and numbers, they rank up there as two of the best in the game.
So, Elizabeth.
I agree with what Ben is saying. The Nationals for sure have the best pitchers, a few best pitchers in the league, but I also think it's really, really hard, as both of you have said, to predict the rotations and predict anything really, because this season is going to be extremely different. As we know, it's a 60-game season, which, is not a normal season. It's not regular. So it's going to be really, really hard to predict anything. And as I said before in previous shows, I think that the teams that will have an advantage will be the teams that cope with the regulations the best. I think the teams who will be able to follow the rules and the regulations will for sure have an advantage. So it's really hard to predict anything at this point. I think even obviously there are favorites, to make the playoffs and win the playoffs. Obviously, Yankees, Dodgers are the obvious ones, but I think it's really, really hard to predict anything, because if players of a certain team don't follow certain regulations, they're done. It's hard to come back from that. It's hard, especially if a player gets sick. That's it. That's terrible for a team. So it's really hard to predict anything right now.
Yeah, the only thing, that you can predict this year is that it's going to be unpredictable. And I think, you bring up a good point, Elizabeth, in the fact that we're dealing with something here that we haven't ever dealt with before in terms of, the coronavirus and the very high possibility that, a player or players on certain teams test positive. Usually you're just worried about guys getting hurt on the field and maybe catching a flu bug or something, throughout a season, but nothing, as serious as COVID is. And now that is an extra layer to this, as you said, that, players and coaching staff and everybody involved in the organization is going to have to be mindful of. So yeah, definitely a very unpredictable season, but still excited to get it going here in the next 9 or 10 days or so.
Very soon.
So guys, I will read you the list as MadeMLB.com has aligned them, and you tell me what you think, because I was very surprised with this list. So I'll start from 10 to 1, although I already gave you 1. So number 10, the St. Louis Cardinals. Number 9, the Houston Astros. Number 8, the New York Mets. Number 7, the Texas Rangers. Number 6, the New York Yankees. Number 5, the LA Dodgers. Number 4, the Cleveland Indians. Number 3, the Cincinnati Reds. Number 2, the Tampa Bay Rays. And number 1, as I said, the Washington Nationals. One of the things that I felt, and you're looking at two teams in the Dodgers and the Yankees that are the favorites to win all the whole Wasam, as we say. They are going to go to probably the World Series at the end of the day, because I think everyone's going to be raking on the Astros this time around. I don't understand why the Dodgers and the Yankees were so far down the list in the rotations. They have fantastic rotations to put together.
Honestly, as I mentioned, as you said, Eduardo, Yankees, Dodgers are the favorites. So I agree with you. I don't know why they're so low on the list in the rotations. And also, I agree on another point. Houston Astros, they were one of the top teams, in my opinion. They have a great roster. They have great potential. But with all the scandals that went on last season, obviously, I think people are a bit skeptical with the Houston Astros. So that's why I think they're a bit lower on the list, but I think they're still a very prominent team if you set aside all the scandals and, the cheating scandals, obviously, that were going on. But as I said, it's very, very hard to predict anything at this point. So the only thing that I want to comment on is I don't think the Yankees should be as low on the rotation list as they are. But again, as I said, it's hard to predict.
The one thing that jumped off the table at me is the fact that the Tampa Bay Rays are so high. I mean, you look at it and what they did last year with their openers. I mean, they didn't even use starters half the time. And now where did they have them pegged? Eduardo was second, correct? Second on that list. It's kind of a bit strange to me because they haven't made any, major additions in the rotation. As far as the Los Angeles Dodgers go, I mean, obviously they lost Hyun-Jin Ryu to the Jays, who was a big part of that Dodger rotation, but they still have Clayton Kershaw, who is pretty good. So it's a little bit surprising that they are as low on the list as they are, like Elizabeth said. But that Rays thing to me just jumped off the table, considering how they utilized their pitching staff last year. It was just so unorthodox and different. I mean, a lot of other teams tried it, but to have the Rays second on that list is a little bit strange to me.
To me, what jumped out with me with the Rays is that they have two of the starting five that they name here on Blake Snell and on Ryan Yarbrough that are not going to be playing. Snell, basically, because he said that he won't play for peanuts, and Yarno just tested positive 2 days ago. So for COVID, so they won't be around from what I perceive to start the season anyways, and Snell won't be around altogether. So when you have two of your major pitchers in the rotation gone, how can you put it at number two? The other team that jumped out at me in that regards is also the Cleveland Indians. I mean, we know the tradition of the Indians is to lose at the last minute, but their rotation is brand new. Like, I mean, it was just formed because they lost a lot of players. They lost 3 pitchers from the rotation during the offseason. So, you're trying with 2 new ones. Zach Plesac being one, and the other one, Shane Bieber, who wasn't there. And they have him at number 1 in the rotation.
Yeah, that's another interesting one. I mean, looking at their rotation, I mean, they have Carlos Carrasco, who is, I guess, conceivably going to be the ace of that staff, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy over the last number of years. So that's a question mark going into the season for Cleveland. You mentioned Shane Bieber, who wasn't there. Brad Hand is another guy who is new, to the organization this year. Mike Clevenger, also somebody they had last year, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, but not somebody that is going to jump off the charts at you. So that's another one that's a little bit strange to me. And I don't know about the top 10 in terms of rotations, but I think the Jays are up there, at least in the top half this year in terms of their rotation, which is something we haven't been able to say since the playoff runs of 2015 and 16. So in terms of them specifically, they're in a lot better case, in a lot better position pitching wise than they have been in quite some time themselves.
Yeah, that's definite. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you guys about is, what's been going on with the Jays, particularly because the last two let's say, warm-up games, inter-squad games, have been very well publicized because of they had 3 grand slams in the inter-squad games, which the Jays only have 1 in their history. So it kind of put me out there thinking of how are these guys reacting and at what level they are pitching to each other.
I mean, The Jays are a young team. I think they're very prominent. I think they have a lot of very young, prominent players. I mean, Guerrero, Vladdy Jr. got moved up to first base, which I think is a great decision. But also they have Chase Anderson, who is injured right now, who's a huge asset to the team. So again, they had good warm-up games. However, it's still very hard to predict anything with this team, especially with all the young players the Jays have right now. I think it's going to be hard on them with the 60-game season, because I feel like it takes longer for young players to really get into the game. But again, it's a very unpredictable season.
So I've been trying to think of the Jays starting lineup as it stands, because with the power that they have in the bench, and it's a very powerful bench. If we look at it from, let's say, 3 to 7, it's a very powerful bench. You have Vladdy, Bichette, Biggio, Hernandez, that probably will be there as well. And you have Rowdy Teles, that probably will be DHing in most of the time. As far as Travis goes, I don't see much power out of him. That he's going to be, he probably will put the ball in play, in movement, but that's about the size of what I see from him. In the case of Gurriel, has been now, from what I understand, penciled in at the 7th spot, which to me seems lucrative, very bad, because he's a fast runner that could probably lead off very well. Grichuk is in the 2 spot, from what I understand. So I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be something that is structured, something that, I don't know. It just doesn't seem natural to me that you are going to put your top players in a position of not being able to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gurriel is a little bit low in batting order as well. I think one of the top 2 spots in the order is probably the best spot for him to be in the lineup, because like you said, then you have all the young guys and power hitters all in one little sort of area in the lineup, one right after the other. And you were mentioning Gurriel's speed. He has a lot of that. He's one of the faster guys on the team, number one. And number 2, he has the ability to put the ball in play. He doesn't strike out a whole heck of a lot. So I think, if they put him second in the batting order, that might be, a good spot for him. Maybe a guy like Randall Grichuk leads off, or maybe you flip those 2 or something like that. I don't love Bichette in the leadoff spot, because I think that wastes his power potential. I think he needs to be in an RBI spot in the lineup, either 3rd, 4th, or 5th. You can sort of mishmash them, Bichette, Guerrero, and Biggio, but even Biggio, I think, would be better suited in a 6 type of spot, or maybe he leads off. There's a lot of different options for the Jays, but in terms of Gurriel specifically, I think you're right in that he is penciled a little bit low in the lineup. In terms of Travis Shaw, he had an off season last year, of course, had a brutal year, to be quite frank. 7 homers and 16 RBIs, hit just $157 in 86 games with the Milwaukee Brewers, but two 30-plus home run seasons the years before that, in 2018 and 2017 with Milwaukee, 32 and 31 respectively those years. So he's got power, and that's now he's going to potentially at least be playing half his games this year in an absolute bandbox at the Rogers Center. So I think we could see him break out power-wise again this year. He's going to get regular playing time now, with being presumably the everyday first baseman. So yeah, I think this Jays lineup is pretty pretty deep. I mean, they're not going to win the division because they have to contend with the Red Sox and the Yankees, but I think a wild card spot is very much an attainable goal, especially if the pitching staff performs to its potential.
So, Elizabeth, anything to comment?
I mean, I think the thing is with the Jays is that they're pushing their young players right now, like Guerrero, Bichette, these young players, and Gurriel, he's a more experienced player. That I think that's one of the reasons why he's lower. But I agree, I think he should be higher in the lineup. But again, I think the wild card spot for the Jays is possible, but I also think there's a very good chance for them to miss out on the playoffs. I mean, they're a prominent team, don't get me wrong. I think they have a lot of potential, just not this season yet.
So, from the green of Skydome, we'll go now to the white ice of MLSC Scotia Arena, because they have announced the schedule for the NHL startup. Interesting ideas for the opening games here in Toronto, being on July 28th. A couple of good matchups for the Eastern Conference. We are looking at Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia, and Toronto versus Montreal. The battle of Pennsylvania and the battle of Canada. Let's put it that way, because whenever Montreal and Toronto face each other, there is always fireworks somewhere around, not necessarily inside the arena.
For sure. I mean, it's two Canadian teams. I mean, that's great, right? But there's obviously deep rivalry between Montreal and Toronto, and I think they're very different teams as well. So that's going to be extremely exciting to watch. And honestly, I think Montreal, when they go against Pittsburgh in the qualifying round, I think it's for their best option is to lose, so they would be eligible for the first pick in the draft. But nonetheless, it's going to be very exciting to watch the Toronto-Montreal game, exhibition game. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be good to, get that hockey fix back a little bit quicker, but also just in terms of the players themselves, I think it serves a very big purpose to get some game action under your belt, because, let's not forget these guys have been off since, early to mid-March. So by the time they begin again, it's going to be 4+ months that they have been away from the game. And that's quite a long time. So I think playing these exhibition games is a smart move on the part of the National Hockey League, because I think it's going to get these guys, back into the flow of things a little bit. It could prevent some injuries, having that couple of exhibition games before the intensity of the playoffs ratchets up. So I think this is a good move, and really looking forward to watching some of these games.
I agree with Ben, and I think especially these 3 months were especially tough on the goalies, because I think the goalies really need repetition, and a lot of goalies in the NHL don't even like backups to play with for them. The main goalies want to play all the time, because that's just how their mechanism works, and the more repetition for the goalies, the better. So I think these exhibition games will benefit the goalies specifically in general the most, I think.
The interesting thing in that I find in these two games particularly is that there's a whole lot of homegrown talent from Toronto in those lineups, and it is going to show here in Canada, especially in Toronto. Who do you route for? Because we know that there is a lot of Montreal Canadian fans in Toronto, but there is plenty of Penguin fans as well. So, it's amazing to see, the match between Toronto and Montreal. We know what's going to happen there. Anderson against Price, and see who survives the duel. better in that first match. So it's going to look really well in the match. And the last game of that evening, it's in the West Coast, and it's the Battle of Alberta between Edmonton and Calgary. I think they really put the fire to the fire when they go into Edmonton, and Calgary has a lack of being able to win in Edmonton. So it's looking pretty good for Edmonton, I think.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the score doesn't really matter, but just in terms of, the rivalry that has been reignited between the Oilers and the Calgary Flames, you look at some of the games this season between those two teams, and they have been very highly, physical, rough and tumble, in your face affairs. I mean, there was one where there was all kinds of fights, one right after the next. A kind of a line brawl occurred in that game. So I think, this is a matchup that a lot of fans were hoping they would see in the first round of the playoffs pre-COVID, before the season was paused. So I think it's great to, that they're going to get that fix. And, hopefully, for the sake of those two markets and for the sake of hockey fans in general, just because, like I said, that rivalry has been reestablished in a major way with both teams being competitive. If those two are able to meet in the first round of the real playoffs, in the round of 16 portion, I think that is going to be one heck of a series.
For sure, definitely agree with Ben. I mean, Calgary, Edmonton, great rivalry, just like Toronto and Montreal. And again, Canadian teams going against each other, I think it's just exciting. And also, obviously, Edmonton has McDavid, so big advantage there. But as you said, Eduardo, the score doesn't matter in these exhibition games, but I'm just excited to see, the Canadian teams go against each other.
So one of the things that shocked me yesterday was a wonderful commercial by Lenny McDonald announcing the opening of the Canadian Hockey Hall of Fame that will open tomorrow. And it shocked me because if you are trying to create a bubble in Toronto for the players and for their safety, you are opening the Hockey Hall of Fame being steps away from the hotel where the players are staying. Doesn't seem correct to me. I mean, it's already a problem in the underground in Toronto with how the city is going to be completely bombarded with not being able to walk outside up in the upper part of the city. You have to walk through the underground. And now you open the Hall of Fame and you have players staying at the Royal York Hotel. It just doesn't seem normal that they are opening venues like that where people are grouped together and with a lot of risk at contaminating themselves.
For sure. I think it's not the right decision to open things so soon. And also the whole situation with the Toronto bubble for me is very confusing because they're basically closing down the main streets. Front Street will be closed down, Adelaide, other main streets will be closed down. And Toronto is one of the busiest cities. I mean, especially right now when the economy is kind of starting to open back up again and people have to go to work and people have to run errands and they won't be able to because most of the streets will be closed. So that's really confusing to me. I don't know how the city of Toronto will operate and how they will go around that. I really don't know. But I honestly think there will be some protests from citizens. We'll see. But for me, this situation is very, very confusing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's going to be protocols obviously put in place by the Hockey Hall of Fame to, adhere to social distancing guidelines and obviously following the limitations on the number of people allowed to gather indoors. So I don't think, that's something to be worried about. But I'm overall pretty cautiously optimistic about, moving forward in terms of, the reopening. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a political show, but I think that, overall, we've been in stage 2 here of this reopening for, more than a month now, and we haven't seen a real uptick in cases. In fact, today we saw the lowest number of cases in, almost 4 full months since, the end of March. So I think overall things are going well. Is it maybe a bit risky to do this? Yes, it is. But I think, at the end of the day, we have to be cautiously optimistic and, hope that if there is, an uptick in cases arising in COVID cases, that the government acts accordingly and, reinstates some of these restrictions that are in place right now.
So talking about, the how this scheme of games is going to work towards crowning a Stanley Cup champion, and what's following in the series of events, because we have then there is the draft, there is the naming of the MVPs and all the select award winners. How do you think that's going to work, considering that they are planning to start the next season already in December? Because it doesn't look like there is too much time for training, too much time for getting in coherence there.
Yeah, it's a very quick turnaround for the National Hockey League, and I'm not a huge fan of it. I think, waiting until January 1st to reopen or restart the next season probably would have been a smarter move, because like you said, Eduardo, the Stanley Cup Championship ends, Game 7 would conceivably be played somewhere around, I don't know, the 12th or something of October. So that leaves, about 6-7 weeks until the start of the season, let alone training camp, which is going to last about 2 weeks prior to the start of the season, and any exhibition games that they might decide to sneak in there as well. So you're looking at about a 4, week off season for a lot of these guys who make it to the Stanley Cup final. And I think that could be detrimental, not only in terms of the virus itself, but also injuries, because, you can say, well, this last 4-month pause has been the off season this year, just in a different time. But I think, like you said, it's a bit too quick. Waiting that extra month probably would have been the smartest idea. But at the end of the day, they're trying to get in as many games as they can get in, because it's all about money. And the more games you play, the more money you make. And so that appears to be the goal of the National Hockey League. And, like I said, I don't agree with it, but that appears to be the path down which they are going to go.
I do agree with you, Ben, on this one. I think they could have pushed it a month. I think players need more time to kind of rehabilitate and rest a bit more before the season actually does start. But I think a few of the main reasons why they're starting it so early, first, as you said, Ben, finances. And also another reason, I think they don't want the next regular season to go really far into the summer. Because obviously it's going to go, I don't know how they're going to go about this, but it's going to go to a longer date than it usually does. So I think they're trying to start everything as soon as possible so that the season can kind of at least have dates similar to what the dates should be. So I think that's another reason why they're really urgent with starting the new season. But I agree. I think especially from a player's perspective, I think they would want to rest, especially players who make it far in the playoffs. So I don't know how it's going to play out. I think some players will disagree with this decision for sure.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, as far as I can tell, I haven't heard any final decision on the length of the 2020-21 season in terms of games, the number of games that are going to be played. So, obviously it's going to be a shortened season, but there's nothing saying, they started the 2012-13 season, the lockout season, around January the 15th, say, and they were able to sneak in 48 games into the season and end relatively on time compared to their regular schedule. So I think they are going to, they're obviously going to have a shortened season, because otherwise the whole schedule of the sport is going to be messed up until they decide to change it. So you have to prevent that by having a shortened season next year. But I think they're going to do that, and they're going to try and have the playoffs start, all things going well, of course, and there's no second wave, and they don't need to pause it again or anything like that. All going well, they're going to try and have the postseason start the second week of April and have it end the last week of May, the first week of June, somewhere around there, so that the 2021-22 season is least impacted by this as possible.
So I'm going to go to you, Ben, because you are more familiar with the HL and the OHL and all the minor league systems that are not playing, and that's one of the questions I have in this season, because if they are, let's say, when training starts after the end of the season, what happened? Who do they invite? Because there hasn't been activity in the leagues at all. So that it creates an impact. Who do you invite to camp? How do you judge that invitation?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because a lot of these teams won't, or a lot of these younger players coming out of Major Junior or the American Hockey League won't have strapped on pair of skates in game action, or in even a camp setting since March 11th or 12th, or whenever the seasons were paused and then ultimately canceled. So I think that is a good point, but I think what they will do is try to just take it into consideration, all the circumstances. This entire COVID experience has been extremely unique and abnormal. So I don't think the coaches and the general managers and those people making that decision are going to be expecting regular sort of standout play from some of these guys. Obviously there will be some who will come out and they will show off and earn themselves a spot, but others, it might take a little bit of time. So I think the coaches in their evaluations are probably going to take that into consideration, considering just how unprecedented these times have been.
Elizabeth, any comment on that?
No, I completely agree. And I think another kind of hockey league that will have issues is youth sports, university sports, especially because, well, it's really, for them, they only have a certain amount of years that they can participate in the sport. So I don't know how they will go about the eligibility, and they have to coordinate the academics. And obviously youth sports championships have been canceled. That's already confirmed. So I really wonder how they're going to go about this, and how they're going to go about the eligibility of certain players, and if they're going to extend it or not.
Yeah, in terms of that, I think in terms of youth sports eligibility, I think what they have decided to do is treat this sort of as a quote unquote red shirt season for these athletes who are missing time due to their seasons being paused, the fall seasons. They have not made a final decision, I do not believe, on the 2 semester sports, that being basketball, volleyball, and hockey, ones that start in October and stretch forward into the winter semester, but they will not start prior to January the 1st if they do at all. U Sports has come under fire this week because the board of directors voted in the football side of things to not extend the 25-year-old age cap for one more season. You cannot play U Sports football after the age of 25, whether you remain academically eligible or not. So that has caused a lot of controversy because all the other athletes are getting an additional year of eligibility, but the 24-year-old players who age out, those are ones who turn 25 before September the 1st of their final season. They age out a year sooner. So those guys are not going to get a chance to play. So that's something in terms of the eligibility that they have done, and that has caused a lot of controversy. But obviously, staying academically eligible is going to be important for these players, because you can't play without, being enrolled in classes in the school. So that is what they have decided to do in terms of eligibility. So most of these guys are not going to be impacted by this in terms of losing a year of their athletic eligibility, so long as they remain academically eligible throughout the duration of their athletic eligibility.
So, go ahead, Elisa. Sorry.
No, I didn't. I'm good.
So, from the hockey arena, we go to the gridiron in the news in the States. You brought a good point with youth sports. This story comes out of actually youth sports in the US, and it's a story that really shocked me because I know the gentleman in question, David Sidhu. David Sidhu, former Saskatchewan Rough Rider player and a legend in Saskatchewan, was arrested and sentenced to 3 months in jail for a college admission scam for his son. He allegedly paid $9,000 to another student to take the admissions test, SATs, for his son, and it has caused turmoil in the States because after the scam that they was run by several people in California, including actresses and actors from Hollywood. So I don't know if you guys have read the story, but it's interesting. I mean, and the only thing that's you said, I have no excuses. I plead guilty. I must pay for my actions. But what kind of example does he set for his children if he's paying somebody to take admissions tests for them?
Well, that's terrible. I mean, it's one thing when a young kid or young student tries to cheat the system, but it's another thing. It's a whole another level of cruelty when an inexperienced adult parent tries to do it for their child. I mean, that's just horrible, and that's basically taking the opportunity from someone who actually deserves that. So that's terrible. And I mean, I think the punishment should be much more than just 3 months in prison.
Yeah, I mean, look, we obviously heard about the college admissions scandal that was making waves. I believe it was last summer that several high-profile celebrities were entangled in this scandal. And I think, look, this is just another example of that. And, it really doesn't set a very good example, to get back to your original question, Eduardo, because, it's teaching these kids that you can just do whatever you want as long as you have money and fame. And, the sentence is 3 months in jail, which, I mean, I don't mind it because it's not like he went out and tried to kill somebody or anything stupid like that. It's a relatively minor offense. It's a large offense, but it's, relatively speaking, a minor one that, you shouldn't have to pay for it for the rest of your life. But obviously, defrauding the system is not something that you should just be able to get away with scot-free either. So, I'm not going to get into the sentence itself, but it really doesn't, it doesn't set a good example because, like I said, it just means, it just goes to show young youth that you can just, try and cheat the system and get what it is that you want, as long as you or somebody more accurately, in this case, a parent of yours is, full in the pocketbook. So it's not a good thing, and he's going to pay for it.
So continuing in the wonderful gridiron, we come back to the CFL here in Canada, and I know that a lot of CFL fans are really trying to figure out what's going on, because the deadline is almost less than a week away, and there is still no sign of any notion of if this league is going to start or not. Ben?
Yeah, I think there's obviously still a lot to be worked out. Riley Gillespie Wilson and I were touching on this earlier today on our CFL No Yards show here on the BarnBurner TV Network and Zingo TV Channel 250. But we were discussing, how a lot of the players are not very big fans of the proposal that was forwarded to the Players Association a couple of weeks ago by the Canadian Football League executive. And I think, these guys are asking to be paid as close to in full as they can. We heard Vernon Adams on our show today saying at least 50% is what he is after, 50% of his salary, but 60, 70, 80, 90 is what he would prefer, because, there are a lot of guys who are going to be, if there was a season, leaving relatively secure off-season jobs to go play in the CFL for, a chunk of what it is that they make. And especially for the guys who are making, less money, let's just say a third of their salary, 60, and they make $60,000. Well, then you're down to $20,000 and you haven't factored in taxes yet and that sort of stuff. And then you're taking home, I don't know, like what, $11,000, and that's if you don't spend anything. So, and that's nothing to live off of. So clearly a lot of kinks to be worked out. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic because, we were talking about on that show, 7-8 weeks ago when Jared Bapty was hosting it, that the likeliest scenario was that the CFL was not only going to cancel this season, but cease operations beyond that. Now it looks as if they are at least attempting to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement beyond this return to play agreement that they're trying to work out. So things are looking a little bit more optimistic. They've obviously gone to the government again and asked for another figure, $42 million. But the thing that makes me optimistic about that is that it is only for the purpose of this season and being able to cover salaries and operational costs and things of that nature. It's not to keep the league financially viable beyond that. So there must be some inkling for Randy Ambrosie and the rest of the staff that this league can remain viable beyond 2020. And that is certainly a positive sign. But again, still a lot to iron out in the next 8 days prior to that player delivered July 23rd deadline.
Well, there have been kind of conflicts in every league, and I think players and the leagues disagree. I mean, we saw how the MLB struggled to start off their season and how the MLB struggled to come to an agreement. And there has also been some disagreements in the NBA and NHL as well. As some players said that they don't want to play. Every league has had some minor disagreements. I would say MLB had some major disagreements. Yeah, but the CFL and the NFL, they have the advantage of kind of laying back a bit and having the time to watch other leagues and watch how other leagues proceed with this. Because as for MLB, time was pushing. They had to make a decision right there and then and there, or else they were in danger of not having a season at all. The CFL and the NFL still have a bit of time. They can kind of lay back, see how other leagues are handling it. So I think they do have that advantage. And as you said, Ben, obviously the CFL is in big danger. The NFL will be fine either way, but the CFL doesn't have as much financing, so they were in very, very big danger. But I think now, as you said, things are looking up for the CFL. But I think there are going to be still some disagreements and some headlines that say, the CFL and the players disagree and there's going to be conflicts, but I really hope they figure it out in the end.
Yeah, well, let's be clear. I mean, they are running out of time. This is July 15th tonight as we sit here. That would be week 6 would presumably, well, not presumably, it would be kicking off tomorrow night under regular circumstances. Obviously, these are very irregular circumstances, as we have talked about on this show and on this network about 100 million times since COVID began. But, they're running out of time here to have some sort of meaningful season if they don't pull their, butts at their heads out of their butts here and, do some negotiation and get something done. Because otherwise, you're going into August and you don't have an agreement done and you want to start the season in September and have a 6-game season ahead of the playoffs. So, you can't play the Grey Cup in the middle of January in Canada, right? So there isn't an infinite time here. And, like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic, but lots of work to be done, because if they don't start soon, I mean, they have started, but if they don't make some real headway soon, they're going to run out of time.
Now, here's this next question. What happens to Ambrosi if this doesn't pull through? Because I don't see many people hiring a commissioner that wasn't able to resolve issues with their own players and their own league.
Well, I mean, I don't know the structure of Randy Ambrosie's contract, when it's supposed to expire, but the owners definitely are not going to be, thrilled that there's no season, but they also don't want him to be paying, guys like Vernon Adams 90% of their salary. So I think this is more disagreement with the players and Randy Ambrosie. And at the end of the day, as long as Randy Ambrosie has the majority of the 9 owners on his side, well, he's, his job is safe, because at the end of the day, he works for the owners. So as long as they are in tune with what he's doing and how he's handling this, then he doesn't have to be worried about his job. I don't know that all the owners are thrilled. I mean, obviously, I haven't spoken to any, but, you would have to think that some of them are, really hoping that there is some sort of season and that some revenue, at least from the television rights with TSN. It's not much, but it is something. And obviously, something is better than nothing. But in terms of Ambrosie himself, I don't think he's got, I don't think he's handled this very well myself, but I also don't think that he, has anything to be worried about on the job security front either.
Well, this is a really terrible situation for any owner to be in right now. I mean, a lot is on the line, and in terms of Ambrosie, as you said, Ben, I don't think his position is in jeopardy, but I think he will for sure run into some issues.
So one of the other things that, and we've been talking a lot about the contract side of the CFL trying to get back to play, but have any of you guys heard anything about a plan on how they would start? Because I haven't heard about locations. I haven't heard anything about testing or anything about the players until now.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about testing protocols in terms of locations. Yes, I have heard about that. Winnipeg and Saskatchewan have emerged as the 2 likeliest hub cities, and that is solely based on, well, it's twofold. One is, at least in my mind it is anyway, one is, the lack of COVID cases in both provinces. Winnipeg has had 0, or Manitoba, I should say, has had 0 cases in 14 of the last 15 days reported, and Saskatchewan has had very good numbers also. So plus they're in central locations in Canada, so you're not traveling all over the place to try and get to either of those markets. So those two have emerged, but nothing obviously finalized in terms of testing. I haven't heard anything concrete in terms of testing protocols, but you would have to assume anyhow that they're going to mirror that of the other four professional major sports that are looking at coming back over the next little while. The three of them, of the four, Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, and the National Basketball Association, about to do so very soon, obviously. But in terms of the CFL, yeah, I haven't heard anything testing-wise. Location, like I said, Winnipeg and Saskatchewan have emerged as the two most likely spots. Nothing, set in stone there, but wouldn't be shocked at all to see one of those two, or maybe even both, serve as potential hub cities for a possible season.
So what surprises me, and I apologize, Elizabeth, I'll give you the last word because I know that you need to go, and I thank you very much for your time. You have always been a statue here in our show, so I thank you very much for being with us. I know that we extended the time for as of this week, so, and you have other plans, so I thank you very much. But I'll let you have the last word of the CFL.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here, and hopefully next week I can stay for the whole show. But in terms of the CFL, as I said, they have a little bit of the advantage to kind of observe other leagues and see what works, what doesn't work in terms of testing. So I think that the testing protocols will be released further when the other leagues kind of start off, and the CFL can observe what works in the other leagues and what doesn't work. In terms of locations, I think the main priority here is to see which hub cities are doing the best with COVID cases, which they are doing as of now. So I think as long as they continue down that route, everything will be okay. And testing, obviously, as I said, they will follow after the other leagues. And Eduardo, thank you so much for having me on the show. And Ben, thank you for talking to me as well. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. And then there were two.
And then there were two. That's correct. And then there were two. One of the things that shocked me with, and let's continue on the CFL topic because there is a lot of things that go into the CFL. We are talking now about, the ramifications that we haven't heard anything about the testing. But yet they are trying to get a deal with the players to actually work, to come back to work. Shouldn't that be part of the conversation when you are dealing in a presenting a proposal?
Well, absolutely. I think it should, and it probably is. I don't think the CFL is completely blind to the fact that testing is going to be an integral part of this return to play. And you look at it, and if there is not satisfactory testing protocols in place, well, the players are simply going to say thanks, but no thanks. I haven't got the opportunity to read the entire proposal that was sent out. I'm not even sure if it's public knowledge as of this point, quite honestly. So, I'm sure that it is involved in the return to play. It has to be, but I just haven't seen it yet. So, and to be honest, I haven't heard many guys, many players that is barking about, potential shortfalls in the testing protocols. It's more been financial discrepancies that they have been upset with. So like I was saying before, a lot to get done over the next week or so, and they have a little bit more time beyond that probably, but not a whole lot if they want to have a meaningful season.
So we'll go from the CFL to the round ball that bounces very well in Orlando, as they say. And we'll go to the NBA and also the WNBA, because the WNBA is going to start their season again. And one of the things that actually is shocking me and it's devastating to hear that a league wants to put players at risk because the league is more important than lives, is the WNBA asking Elena Del Donne, who suffers from diabetes, to play in the league when it returns. They are forcing her to actually play.
Yeah, I heard that. Riley and I were discussing that in our 12:30 to 1:30 show today, midday Mike, here on the BarnBurner TV Network. But that to me, and Del Don, by the way, is not the only player who is awaiting a decision from this supposed panel of medical experts that is making the final call on this sort of stuff. They didn't deem Del Don, I should say, apparently they didn't deem her at high risk to contract coronavirus, which to me is just ludicrous when you count in the fact that she suffers from Lyme disease, a very serious illness, a very serious condition. And, to put her, an immunocompromised individual in harm's way like this in a, in the middle of a pandemic is a little bit astounding to me. And, because this is different than just opting out because you don't feel comfortable and you don't want to get your family sick or whatever, you don't want to get COVID. That's a personal choice. But this, she had been given advice by her personal physician not to play in the WNBA season this year because of COVID and because of her, health issues that she has gone through with Lyme disease. But they are not willing to pay her if she doesn't play. So now you're making her choose between her health and, her finances, which is definitely never something that somebody should have to choose between. So certainly a difficult situation. And, like I said before, she is not the only player who is finding herself in this predicament in the WNBA right now.
So, there is, we have talked about, everything that has happened so far in the world of basketball, because that's where it all started to
Yeah.
say the least. But there is a lot of stuff going on, and now they have even a snitch line in there. So,
several guys have actually been being caught using, or at least, through that snitch line, caught breaking the bubble. Somebody on the Sacramento Kings, I forget who his name is escaping me at the moment, but
yeah, there is two players, one from the Sacramento Kings and one from the Chicago Bulls, that went out to get a hamburger.
Yeah.
I mean, if I am going to take my life in stake, I would go higher than a hamburger to risk.
Yeah.
But then now I understand why the Toronto Blue Jays did what they did, in the idea that they put a high price on if they break the bubble, because what's $1,000 to an NBA player and 10 days suspension?
Yeah,
I mean, while they're getting paid,
well, I mean, heck, they can pull that out in cash, for God's sake, and go pay the fine, right? So
yeah, and that. But what was surprising is that it was another player that snitched.
Yeah,
I mean, that's sad, because I'll tell you, and I don't care. These two players are going to go after him once they come back into playtime very highly. Like,
Well, I mean, the idea of it though is that it's supposed to be anonymous. I mean, whether it is or not, you never really know. But the original idea of this, rat line or this snitch line or whatever you want to call it, is that it was supposed to be an anonymous way of reporting guys who are outbreaking the bubble. Which, on the surface, I don't hate, because it's not as if it's being done for public safety measures, right? It's not like you're being confined to a room and being kidnapped. This is for public health and public safety, and the safety of the rest of the players in the league. So I think it's very important that these guys adhere to this sort of stuff. I mean, so that's why they have this line. But whether it truly is anonymous, I guess we'll never really know.
well, it's not, because they actually came out with the name of it was Chris Paul who snitched on the other two players. I mean, it's
well, I guess the anonymous part isn't really working out so well, is it?
Not really. It's sad. Like I said, poor Chris Paul now has to actually be thinking about his life on the court.
Yeah,
because he's not going to contract COVID. He's going to contract beating whenever he has the ball.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I think I think Chris Paul did the right thing, regardless of whether it's gotten out or not that he was the one who did it. If it was Chris Paul, then it obviously sucks that it got out, because that wasn't the original goal of this line. It was, like I said, supposed to stay anonymous. But if it has not, and that has faltered somehow, that's obviously a difficult situation for Chris Paul. But regardless, he did the right thing here, because again, this is not about disparaging the person or whatever. This is about keeping everybody safe. And if people are outbreaking the bubble, you would like to think that more guys are calling into this line and reporting these guys, hopefully in an anonymous way, so that they don't face any potential retribution if the two teams were to match up at any point. But again, Chris Paul did the right thing, and hopefully more players aren't deterred from doing it because it apparently got out.
So one of the interesting stories that came out of the bubble is that Tim Duncan, who is one of the assistant coaches for San Antonio, has now said that he's stepping out of the bubble because he wants to take care of LaMarcus Aldridge, which I find it interesting. Why would a coach step out of helping his team win a championship to assist a player to recover that is not available to play?
Yeah, it's a bit strange. I mean, I don't really know the ins and outs of the situation, but on paper, like on the surface, it is a bit odd. Let's be real though, the Spurs aren't going anywhere. Like, they're not going to make the playoffs barring anything crazy happening here in this final eight regular season game stretch before the playoffs begin here in this bubble in Orlando. So I think the Spurs are, they're not obviously a championship contender. They're not even going to make the playoffs, but it is still a bit odd that Tim Duncan, has come all the way to Florida and said, what, never mind, I'm going to go help LaMarcus Aldridge recover from his injury. It's a bit strange, but, at the end of the day, I guess that's the decision he made. And I guess it keeps him and his family safe, if nothing else.
Now, one of the stories that really in the NBA that kind of made me laugh, because they are talking about the logistics of being under the bubble in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And they are talking about the amount of equipment and luggage that you have to deal with, all the logistics. And they say, well, the story goes, there is 4,000 suitcases, 6,000 uniforms, 40 washer and dryers that have to be transported all under this bubble, and they're saying it's only going to cost $750,000 to get it there. So, I mean, why do you have to come up with a story in the NBA to that extreme to make it? It's a joke. Like, I mean, you are telling people that the logistics of this embroil is going to cost $750,000 to people in Orlando that are technically dying around them.
Slow news day, I guess, huh?
Yeah, it shocked me. Like, I mean, you start reading the story and you say, hold on, what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, who
report on
really...
the game, report what's going on, not on what's useless.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, who really cares about how many jerseys there are and how much it's going to cost to get them there? It must have been a slow news day for the writers at NBA.com, I suppose.
Well, the story came out of, I'll tell you in 2 seconds, because it's a crazy story. It came out of the Orlando Enquirer. Laugh.
Slow news, yeah, very slow news day sports-wise over there.
With 2 leagues playing warm-ups and games, you don't have anything else to write about. I think we should hire them for BarnBurner because they will understand what is actually reporting on the news without any content. So now let's move quickly to the MLS because we are quickly running out of time. It's amazing how fast that hour and a half runs.
Yeah.
So the MLS started. Let's recap what has happened in the MLS. It started with 2 teams leaving the bubble completely. Then you got into playtime, and the games have been shockers all the way around because you didn't expect teams that have won games to be there. And we are talking Toronto FC tying with DC United after having a 2-goal lead, and they just gave it away.
Yeah.
You're talking about the LA Galaxy losing against Portland, which wasn't expected either. Although Chicharito already came out with his own quote and said, "I'll take this one on my shoulders. It was all my fault." And then you had the Houston Dynamo tying LAFC, which you cannot have a more star-filled team in the MLSC than that. And then you look at a game like the Inter Miami against Philadelphia, and Philadelphia wasn't able to score more goals on the newest team in the league.
Newest team in the league that was down a man for a portion of it.
Oh, well, that's another story. I mean, there have been more red cards awarded in this since the start than there were all season long last year. So I don't understand where we are coming from, because that's the other defeat for TFC. TFC had a 2-0 lead, a 2-goal lead with DC having 2 men down.
Well, and how long, what was there, 6 minutes to go, and they had a 2-0 lead and coughed it up, in the final 5 or 6 minutes and had to settle for a tie. So what's that?
No, it's incredible. I mean, they just gave it up. It seems like we are back to the start of last year's season when they weren't able to do anything, and they tie after tie after tie.
Well, and you just look at it, and they were they were all over DC in that match for the first 84 minutes, and then somehow, coughed it up. And like you said, DC was down a man at two men at a point, right? So yeah, that's a really debilitating loss for them. But I'm sure they'll be motivated on two fronts, playing one of their rivals tomorrow night in the Montreal Impact, and trying to bounce back and get a victory after that, after snatching.
You know what? I think Greg Vanney must be focusing on that game a hell of a lot, because it has a double value. As you know, this year the Canadian Championships are kind of difficult to attest. So what the Canada Soccer Canada has done is that they are going to count the games between Canadian teams in the MLS as tournament games as well for the Canadian Championship. So the team now brings a double value to Montreal and TFC. If TFC was to lose this, they would be in fourth spot right now in the Canadian Championship tournament. So it's crazy.
Yeah, no, that definitely adds an additional layer to that match, and that DC game, though, they just snatched a draw from the jaws of victory at that point. I mean, we've been over, but 2-0 with 5 minutes to go, and the team you're facing is down 2 guys, and you end up giving it up. So this TFC team better be laser focused tomorrow night and not take the pedal off the metal, so to speak, if they're up late in that game against the Impact, because like you said, it has a huge bearing not only on the MLS's back tournament, of course, but also the CONCACAF Champions League also. So, very important.
And not just that, Ben, but I am looking down the schedule, and their next matchup is probably one of their toughest matchups, because it's against New England Revolution. New England has had Toronto's number for a long time. So they have to be really focused on what they are doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that is yet another layer to that Impact game tomorrow night. A team that, if I'm not mistaken, TFC has fared fairly well against recently, but DC United on the other end of this, or at least New England Revolution, excuse me, on the other end of that spectrum, a team, as you mentioned, that they have fared rather poorly against for quite a while now. So that's a team that they struggle to compete with. So that makes winning tomorrow's game, not just not losing it, but coming out victorious, all the more important if they want to, get some points and take a little bit of the pressure off against that Revolution squad coming up on the weekend.
Yeah, well, the worst part for Toronto is that game against the New England Revolution is at 9:00 in the morning. So basically, if you are going to go, into the field, you have to be there at 6 a.m. You have to get up probably at 5.
Oh, at least.
You have to have warm-ups and everything, and prepare for the game carefully. So, it's crazy. I mean, you play a game at 9:00 in the morning in Orlando, and you are facing hot weather from 1.
Well, and I mean, just in general, playing a game that early in the day, I mean, these guys aren't used to doing that. This is, a late afternoon and evening sport, and now you're asking these guys to get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to go play a game at 9 a.m. in Orlando, whereas you said it is quite toasty in Orlando. So definitely going to be a challenge on multiple fronts for TFC in that New England match, which again just speaks to the utmost importance of that Impact game tomorrow evening.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to just go general now, Ben, and let's talk a little bit about the impact of not so much of what's happening in the world of sport, but how COVID has affected the way news are reported, because it has taken up a toll on a lot of the sports writers, a lot of the sports commentators, in the idea that we don't have access to the players, we don't have access to actual constructive reporting in that sense. How do you think the sport is going to be moving forward from here?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, this COVID era has definitely had a major impact on our industry, Eduardo. And, not too long ago, was it that something like 32 or maybe even more journalists from The Athletic were laid off during COVID. And, other guys have been laid off from other people, I should say, have been laid off from other organizations as well throughout this, because there just aren't the volume of stories there. There are stories, but you have to get really creative with the stories that you're telling. And I applaud the journalists, the sports writers, the television, radio reporters that are out there digging for these stories, because this has got to be one of the most difficult times in not only their careers, but in our industry as a whole. It has been struggling for quite some time prior to this, over the last, 5-10 years or so, in terms of the sort of reduction in the amount of sports that is out there for mass consumption on mainstream news stations and newspapers and even radio stations to a bit of a lesser extent. So definitely a difficult time. And, the guys and girls that are out there doing their jobs to the best of their abilities and telling some very unique stories, it has been interesting to see some of the stuff that they've been able to come up with. But it's nice to see that sports is getting back, and, things are starting to get back to a little bit of sense of normalcy for them.
So let's, I mean, you are a young journalist starting your career. How do you see media moving forward? Because this gives you opportunity to a lot of organizations and to the leagues itself to kind of control media access now, because since we haven't been there since March, regulations, new things have been implemented. How do you think the media world will work? Sports media world will work from moving forward in the upcoming months?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've already seen it with writing and things like that, that a lot of it has gone digital, and that's probably going to continue. I mean, look at us. We're doing a television show on Zoom, and that's something that we could start to see happen a little bit more often, or something, equivalent to Zoom. That sort of stuff could start happening. We could start seeing, hopefully not, but we could start seeing less reporters being in dressing rooms just because of social distancing and that sort of stuff, and as long as COVID is a thing. But in general terms, I think we could even start to go a little bit more digital, a little bit more virtual than we already have. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'd love, being able to be in a studio setting and doing shows and doing reports and things like that from a studio. But, right now, this is the best we've got. And, we're making the most of it, aren't we?
Definitely. And I want to thank you, Ben, for being here with me today. Again, I want to thank Elizabeth Rosseston, because she's always been a constant in this show. And just to remind everybody out there that this show can also be heard on the BarnBurner Radio Network and on its 122 platforms on social media. Please also check out barnburner.ca for all the news, whether it is written in the radio, on podcasts, on and written stories in both on the website and in its partner publication, La Portada Canada. And remember that BarnBurner, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but the most important part is live it. And for Spanglish Sports World, Ben Brown, Elizabeth Rosistad, my name is Eduardo Harari, wishing you a good evening and looking forward to seeing you again when BarnBurner returns next week at the same time in this same channel on Zingo Channel 250.
Thanks.